They did not mean to fall this deep. That is the first truth. It was supposed to be light, easy, controlled, just a passing connection, just a little interest, nothing serious. But now your voice stays in their mind longer than it should. Your silence says more than other people's words. Your presence changes the whole temperature of their inner world, and what once felt harmless now feels impossible to escape. This is the part nobody talks about. Real attachment rarely starts with a decision. It starts quietly. It slips in through moments that seem small at first, through a look that lingers, a calm feeling that arrives without warning, a strange sense of being seen without having to explain anything at all. And before the mind can label it, the feeling is already growing roots. So listen closely, because this goes deeper than attraction, much deeper. What feels sudden is usually not sudden. What feels confusing is often already formed. And by the time they realize how much you matter, the change has already happened inside them. They are no longer just noticing you, they are reacting to you, waiting for you, feeling your impact in places they cannot easily control. Stay with this, because the deeper reason is not what most people think, and once you see it, you will never look at emotional connection the same way again. Love almost never begins as a clean choice made in full awareness. It rises from hidden layers of the mind, from emotional memory, from private hunger, from patterns built long before this person ever appeared. When somebody starts falling for another human being, what is really happening is not simple liking. It is a quiet meeting of old wounds, deep needs, familiar emotional tones, and powerful inner projections. The person does not sit down and choose this shift. It moves through them. It builds under the surface. It feels like being pulled by something invisible, something hard to explain but impossible to ignore. At the deepest level, attraction is not only about beauty, charm, or personality, it is about recognition. The psyche sees something in the other person that touches an old inner pattern and says, "This matters." A certain softness, a certain mystery, a certain way of speaking, holding back, opening up, or making silence feel safe. These things wake up emotional structures already waiting inside. That is why people often say they cannot explain their feelings, because the strongest part of the process began before logic could catch it. And once emotional meaning starts attaching itself to a person, the connection begins to grow in the background, long before the conscious mind has words for it. That is why some people think they are just curious, just watching, just casually interested, while inside, a bond is already being built piece by piece. Attachment grows through tiny moments that look harmless on the outside. A small pause in conversation, a glance that feels warmer than it should, a message that arrives at the perfect time, a moment of comfort when the rest of life feels loud. None of these moments seems big enough on its own to change a person. But the mind does not build connection in loud, dramatic scenes alone. It builds it through repetition, through emotional micro-moments, through the quiet feeling of relief that appears when one specific person enters the room, or the screen, or the thought. While the conscious mind still says this is casual, the deeper emotional system is already recording everything. It notices safety. It notices emotional ease. It notices when someone feels strangely familiar, even if they are new. And the bond begins there. This is where things get dangerous for anyone trying to stay detached. Because attachment is not always strengthened by clarity. Sometimes it is strengthened even more by uncertainty. A little warmth followed by distance. A little closeness followed by silence. A sense of connection mixed with mystery. That pattern can pull the mind in even harder. Because now it is not only feeling, it is searching. It is trying to resolve the tension. It is trying to understand what this means. And in doing that, it becomes even more invested. Watch that closely, because many people do not fall deepest in certainty. They fall deepest in emotional ambiguity. By the time they say, "I think this person matters to me," the truth is that the structure of attachment was already there, waiting to be noticed. Then resistance begins, not because the feeling is weak, but because it is strong. The psyche does not always welcome what moves it. When somebody starts having a real emotional response to another person, a conflict often appears between desire and self-protection. One side wants to move closer, another side wants to stay safe. The conscious mind may call it confusion, caution, or bad timing. But underneath all of that is a more honest reality. Something inside feels shaken. Attraction does not only bring pleasure, it also brings exposure. It wakes up vulnerability, longing, dependency, tenderness, and the terrifying possibility that another person now has the power to affect your inner balance. That is why people who feel the most can sometimes pull away the fastest. They are not always rejecting the connection. Sometimes they are reacting to the intensity of what the connection reveals inside them. A meaningful person becomes more than a person. They become a mirror. And mirrors are difficult when they reflect parts of us we have kept hidden, controlled, or denied. This creates that painful push and pull. One moment the person leans in, the next they withdraw. One moment they seem emotionally present, the next they feel far away. It can look inconsistent from the outside, but inside it often makes perfect sense. The heart has already moved forward, while the defensive mind is trying to restore order, and the stronger the emotional impact, the harder that system may fight to keep control. This is why deep feeling so often arrives wrapped in hesitation. When emotional intensity crosses a certain line, fear starts to mix with desire. Not loud fear, not always panic. Sometimes it shows up quietly as overthinking, hesitation, emotional distance, or the sudden need to slow everything down. The mind likes stability, it likes predictability, it likes believing it remains in control of its own inner state. But when one person begins to matter too much, that balance changes. Thoughts become repetitive, attention becomes narrow, the nervous system becomes alert. Even pleasant closeness can feel overwhelming if it arrives with enough force. That is the paradox. The very thing the person wants may also trigger the need to escape for a moment. Not because the bond is false, but because the system does not know yet whether this level of intensity is safe. And if someone is not used to deep connection, strong emotional presence can feel like a threat to identity itself. Suddenly, they are not acting like their usual self. They care more, they wait more, they notice more, they are more affected. That shift can feel beautiful, but it can also feel dangerous. So the psyche does what it often does under pressure. It reduces exposure, it pulls back, it tries to lower the emotional volume. But here is the catch. Pulling away does not always erase feeling. Sometimes it proves how strong the feeling really is, because people do not usually need distance from what means nothing. They need distance from what is powerful enough to move them beyond their comfort zone. Keep listening, because this is where the story gets even deeper, and the next layer explains why some connections feel almost impossible to think about normally. A huge part of that intensity comes from projection. This is where the mind quietly places its own hidden material onto another person and then responds to that person as if all of that meaning truly belongs to them alone. Instead of seeing them as only who they are, the psyche overlays them with memory, hope, fear, unmet needs, and private emotional images. It fills in the gaps, it adds depth, it makes the connection feel larger than the visible facts. That is why someone can become emotionally important faster than logic says they should. The present person is real, yes, but they are also carrying old inner content the observer has not fully faced. Maybe they represent safety, maybe they represent emotional completion. Maybe they carry the fantasy of being deeply understood, finally chosen, finally calmed, finally met. And because that meaning feels so personal, even tiny actions from them can create huge emotional reactions. A simple message feels electric, a delayed reply feels heavy, a small gesture feels unforgettable. The response is not only to the action, it is to the meaning attached to the action. This is why certain bonds can become consuming. The person is not just responding to another human being, they are responding to what that human awakens, symbolizes, and reflects. And the more unconscious that process stays, the more powerful it becomes. This is also why some people think they are obsessed with a person, when in truth, they are entangled with the parts of themselves that the person has activated. That is not weakness, it is psychology. But if you do not see it clearly, it can take over the whole emotional landscape. Once that happens, the other person can stop feeling like a separate individual and start feeling like a living symbol. They seem to carry answers, danger, healing, validation, or loss all at once. This does not happen because the observer is foolish. It happens because the mind is always comparing the outside world to the inside world, and when somebody touches unresolved material, they begin to hold meaning far beyond what is visible. They become a reflective surface. A hidden part of the self appears in them. Maybe it is your buried softness. Maybe it is your need for closeness. Maybe it is your fear of abandonment. Maybe it is your hunger to be chosen without pretending to be someone else. The point is the same. The connection starts reaching deeper than simple interaction. That is why absence begins to matter as much as presence. That is why silence becomes loaded. That is why one small encounter can echo through the whole day. The emotional charge is no longer tied only to real events. It is tied to inner recognition. And inner recognition is powerful, because it feels personal, sacred, almost fated. But stay sharp here, because this is where many people lose perspective. They think the intensity proves perfect compatibility. Sometimes it does not. Sometimes it proves activation. Sometimes it proves unfinished emotional business. Sometimes it shows that the soul has found a mirror, not necessarily a final answer. That does not make the feeling fake. It makes it important in a different way. It means the relationship is not only happening between two people, it is also happening between a person and the hidden parts of themselves now rising into view. That is why inner conflict becomes so strong in meaningful connections. Two forces wake up at the same time. One wants closeness, warmth, surrender, and the relief of being emotionally met. The other wants independence, control, distance, and the safety of not needing too much from anyone. These forces do not politely take turns. They clash under the surface and create mixed signals, unstable behavior, and emotional confusion that can feel impossible to explain. A person may feel deeply invested one day and strangely detached the next. They may move toward intimacy and then suddenly pull back. Not because the feeling disappeared, but because different internal systems are trying to protect different needs. One system says, "This matters, do not lose it." Another says, "This matters too much, do not let it break you." And both feel true at the same time. The mind then tries to make this conflict sound reasonable. It talks about timing, circumstances, practical issues, uncertainty, maybe even compatibility. Sometimes those things matter, but often they become surface explanations for a deeper emotional battle that has not yet been named. If a person is not used to safe intimacy, closeness itself can feel destabilizing. The body reads deep care as exposure. The heart reads it as home. That split creates the classic push-pull pattern, so many people mistake for a lack of feeling, when very often it is the exact opposite. It is feeling colliding with fear, and unless that conflict is faced honestly, the relationship experience becomes full of tension, not always because of what the other person is doing, but because the person caught in the bond is wrestling with themselves in real time. What gets denied inside never truly disappears, it just changes shape. When a person pushes down a desire, a fear, a need, or a soft part of themselves because it feels unsafe or inconvenient, that material does not die. It moves underground. It keeps working from the shadows. It leaks into thought patterns, emotional reactions, strange fixations, sudden sensitivity, and repeated returns to the same person or memory. This is why someone can tell themselves they are over it while still checking, still wondering, still feeling stirred by the smallest reminder. Denial is not resolution. It is separation. And what gets separated from awareness often comes back stronger, especially in relationships. The psyche has a compensating force. It keeps trying to bring hidden content back into view. If a person has denied their need for tenderness, they may become intensely affected by someone gentle. If they have denied their fear of abandonment, they may react strongly to distance. If they have denied their longing to be understood, they may become deeply attached to anyone who seems to see beneath the surface. Then the mind makes a common mistake. It blames the outside person for all the intensity, without realizing that much of the charge comes from what they have awakened inside. This does not mean the connection is imaginary. It means the connection has unlocked something real and unfinished. And until that unfinished part is recognized, the mind keeps circling. It replays scenes. It searches for meaning. It turns the same emotional key again and again, hoping the door will finally open. If this is resonating, stay with it, because the next truth explains why love can feel like losing control, even when part of you welcomes it. Strong attachment changes the way the mind organizes itself. That is why love can feel like a quiet loss of control, not always of behavior on the outside, but of regulation on the inside. Thoughts become less orderly. Attention returns again and again to one person. Memory becomes selective. Emotion reacts faster. The person who once felt self-contained now feels influenced by a presence beyond their own will. And that can be deeply unsettling. The mind likes coherence. It likes believing it directs its own focus. But once emotional investment becomes deep, focus starts orbiting around the one who matters. A memory triggers feeling. A future possibility triggers feeling. A small sign triggers feeling. The experience begins to feel less like something chosen and more like something happening. That is why people try to regain control through distance, logic, distraction, or emotional restraint. Yet none of those strategies fully works if the bond has already taken root. Because the attachment is no longer only a thought, it is a pattern. It has entered the nervous system. It has entered expectation. It has entered the private rhythm of daily awareness. This is the part many people hide. They hide how often they think, how strongly they feel, how much one person can shift their entire internal atmosphere. But hiding it does not weaken it. In some cases it intensifies it. Because what is unspoken often grows in silence. The heart keeps moving, the mind keeps resisting, and the tension between those two movements can make the feeling even more immersive, not because the person is weak, but because the attachment has become part of the inner structure now, not just a passing emotional event. Then comes transformation, not the soft, pretty kind people like to post about. Real transformation is messy. It begins when a person can no longer avoid the emotional material a connection has exposed. Desire rises, fear rises, tenderness rises, shame rises, longing rises, and suddenly the old self cannot hold everything together the same way anymore. This is where real change begins, not when all answers appear, but when avoidance stops working. The connection keeps pressing on unresolved patterns until the person is forced to look inward. Why does this affect me so much? Why does closeness feel so beautiful and so threatening at the same time? Why do I want to move closer and run away in the same breath? These are not random questions. They are signs that the deeper layers are opening. Through repeated emotional confrontation, rigid assumptions start to crack. The person begins to see that their reactions are not created only by external events. They are shaped by memory, expectation, old pain, old hope, and hidden needs that have never been fully integrated. This awareness shifts everything. It moves the center of understanding inward. It replaces simple blame with deeper recognition, and little by little, the psyche reorganizes itself. What was once fragmented begins to connect. What was denied begins to speak. What was feared begins to make sense. That is why some relationships feel life-changing even when they do not last forever. They force a meeting with the self. They expose emotional truths that ordinary life keeps covered. And once those truths are seen, the person cannot fully go back to who they were before the connection began. By the time awareness finally says, "This is love, this is serious, this is real," the emotional structure has usually been there for a long time already. Realization feels sudden only because recognition is late. The bond was built earlier, quietly, through repeated impressions, emotional echoes, tension, comfort, absence, hope, and all the small unnoticed moments the psyche treated as meaningful. Awareness is often the last one to arrive. It steps into a room the unconscious has already furnished. And when it sees what is there, the feeling can seem overwhelming, heavy, even irreversible. That is because the person is not standing at the beginning of attachment. They are standing at the moment attachment becomes visible. Suddenly they understand why the silence felt loud, why the distance felt sharp, why the thought of that person kept returning without permission. The mind catches up, and the full weight lands at once. This is why deep connection can feel like fate after the fact. Not because it was chosen moment by moment with total awareness, but because it was assembled layer by layer outside conscious control until the final picture could no longer be denied. And once that picture becomes clear, everything shifts. The person realizes they are not deciding whether the feeling exists. They are deciding what to do with something that already does. That is the uncomfortable power of it. That is the beauty of it too. And if you have ever wondered how somebody could care more than they planned, feel more than they intended, and struggle to walk away even when they tried, now you know. It was never as simple as choice. It was a slow construction of emotional meaning, and by the time they saw it clearly, it was already alive inside them. So if someone is trying to act unaffected while their inner world keeps circling back to you, do not assume the feeling is small just because the behavior is controlled. Sometimes the deepest emotions arrive with the strongest defenses. Sometimes the calm face hides the loudest storm. Sometimes distance is not proof of disinterest. Sometimes it is proof that the experience has become too powerful to manage smoothly. And if you are the one inside this kind of bond, then understand this clearly. You are not crazy for feeling the shift before you can explain it. You are not weak because someone touched parts of you that were sleeping. You are not confused because the connection carries both comfort and fear. That is often what happens when a relationship reaches below the surface and begins touching the real architecture of the self. The answer is not to romanticize every intense bond, and it is not to run from every feeling that shakes your balance. The answer is to see what the connection is revealing. What does this person awaken? What do they mirror? What need, wound, hope, or hidden truth rises in their presence? Ask that, and the bond starts teaching instead of only consuming. Ignore it, and the same pattern may repeat in different faces, different names, different stories. But face it honestly, and something powerful happens. You stop being ruled only by the intensity. You begin learning from it, and that may be the deepest point of all. Some people enter your life not just to be loved or lost, but to reveal what was already waiting inside you to be seen.